There's a time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Australia's best independent news and opinion radio show, The Daily Australian, with Nicola Charles and Jason Olbourne.
Hello and welcome back to the Daily Australian for episode 129, Wednesday, July the 9th, 2025. And who would have thought that we will be here and debating the merits of the Epstein memo yet again as just one of a multitude of stories that we're going to attack today as we look to how it is that the world is going to change, how justice may well prevail, or have we been overtaken for good by a criminal deep state organisation and that you cannot beat City Hall? We're going to talk about all of that in today's show. Nicola Charles, welcome back and happy hump day.
I think this is an attempted coup, and so far they're winning, let's face it. A coup d'etat by these stakeholder capitalists. That's what I think. It's a subversion of democracy, which is unlawful. It's unconstitutional. They're going ahead with it anyway. We need to hold trials and put these politicians in jail. And my thoughts this morning, I tweeted it out that if we cannot beat this evil that is floating across this planet because we foolishly contributed to them being so wealthy and so powerful, then we, in lockstep ourselves, need to uniformly disobey all orders from these people. And that's now, today, and that's what I intend to do, Jason.
Well, that's kind of how a revolution occurs, isn't it? When the majority of people decide that the system has failed them and they all realize it at the same time. And when the people demand that, that is revolution at the point. If you can achieve it through peaceful means and that nobody innocent gets hurt, then you're well on your way to doing that. And I do wonder if this process is actually achieving it. And well, I mean, the Epstein story is big. And before we get stuck into it, which it seems like that's where we're going to head off, I just want to give you some of the headlines of some of the stories we're going to touch on today. A New Zealand doctor has been fined for importing her own ivermectin to give to patients. Meanwhile, New Zealand has also launched a bill to protect cash. The ABC has been accused of gaslighting viewers on reasons for how cancers seem to be rising in 30s and 40-somethings and not wanting to deal with the elephant in the room. Trump has shut down questions on Jeffrey Epstein as more and more questions are being asked. The US is to work on food security and remove Chinese ownership of farmland in that country. The UK is pushing ahead with pandemic preparedness plans, of course. Donald Trump has threatened 200% tariffs on Australian pharmaceutical exports. How we're going to talk about how government imports migration to change voter redistribution. A doctor has revealed the moment when he knew that Erin Patterson poisoned her relatives. Devin Nunes describes Russiagate corruption as the FBI launches a criminal investigation into former FBI Director James Comey and former CIA Director John Brennan. There's some big stories in today's show, Nicola, but the Epstein stuff is really interesting. And maybe what we should do is play the clip from Michael McCarthy, which I think for many people is where they sit currently, or at least they did after sort of digesting the news of yesterday. I think it's worth playing that for you. And within that clip, what it will also do is show you the time today where Trump actually shut down a question on Jeffrey Epstein, but which Pam Bondi still answered. But we'll get to that. Let's just play the clip for you now.
This is going viral.
Can I ask the Attorney General a question too, President?
Sure.
Your memo and release yesterday on Jeffrey Epstein, it left some lingering mysteries. One of the biggest ones is whether he ever worked for a American or foreign intelligence agency. The former Labor Secretary, who was Miami U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta, he allegedly said that he did work for an intelligence agency. So could you resolve whether or not he did? And also, could you say why there was a minute missing from the jailhouse tape on the night of his death?
Yeah, sure.
Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years. You're asking, we have Texas, we have this, we have all of the things. And are people still talking about this guy, this creep? That is unbelievable. Do you want to waste the time, and do you feel like answering?
I don't mind answering.
I mean, I can't believe you're asking a question on Epstein at a time like this, where we're having some of the greatest success and also tragedy with what happened in Texas. It just seems like a desecration, but you go ahead.
I'm
Sure.
gonna
First
pause it.
about-
She basically goes on. The whole thing is now that there was never a list. Jeffrey Epstein wasn't involved in intelligence. It wasn't a blackmail ring. There's no list. Jeffrey Epstein did kill himself. Here's a man with no list ending his own life. Keep in mind, I might get in trouble saying this now, but the woman who accused Prince Andrew said Prince Andrew trafficked her along with Jeffrey Epstein, magically got hit by a bus. You can imagine what are the chances, but she miraculously survived. This woman came out and said she would not kill herself. After surviving this ordeal, she supposedly kills herself, the woman who is accusing these people. And now, in another miracle, it turns out Jeffrey Epstein wasn't involved in anything. There's no list. Stop talking about it. Stop asking questions. How did Jeffrey Epstein get his money? Stop asking questions. What were they doing on the island? Nothing. Chill. That's in the past.
I'm fuming, Jason. I'm fuming with the administration, and it pains me to say that as someone who's supported the Republicans and conservatism for a long time. And the reason is this. Yes, the floods are devastating and also suspicious. Apparently New Mexico is going through it now as well. But what you're essentially saying there, are you telling us that these floods are more important, or in some way mean that there is not a priority on trafficked, sexually abused, and potentially murdered children? Now, I think this Julian Assange quote, which I've been sent, I haven't managed to confirm this, but I believe this is floating around the interweb. Julian Assange said the reason the FBI wouldn't let the Epstein client list come out in court, or I guess publicly, is because if they did, their blackmail would no longer be useful, and the CIA would lose their control over all the powerful people they have spent decades setting up. Jason, that's exactly what we said on this show yesterday.
Yeah, look, when you look at those headlines that we just saw in that clip, you saw 15 plus Democrats now calling for the Epstein files because they believe that Trump is in them. So how can seemingly the most resilient political leader who campaigned on this, who all of us who have been following back since 2016 were aware from FBI Anon in June of 2016 at least, telling us that the biggest crime perpetuated by the government before Trump was elected, that they were actively involved in human trafficking. And at the same time, Bobby Kennedy was talking about it only recently in relation to Health and Human Services. And then, of course, we've got Tom Homan discovering human trafficking going on with these cartels and this illegal immigration, etc. So how can Trump kick such an own goal on this with his Department of Justice that makes, on the surface, Pam Bondi look ineffective and deceitful, make Kash Patel and Dan Bongino look absolutely compromised? Now, if I was Dan Bongino and this were true, why would I walk away from potentially $1 million career podcasting, because he's the most successful podcaster outside of Joe Rogan, certainly in genuine political circles, to go take $130,000 a year job or $200,000 a year job, whatever it is, peanuts by comparison, with all the stress and accountability, etc. Why wouldn't you just say, look, I've decided that for my health or my family or whatever it is, I'm not doing this anymore, and retire and just walk away if that were the case?
Well, because his credibility walks out the door with him, Jason, because this administration, Trump said, vote for me because I will expose all the JFK secrets and the Epstein secrets. And now all of a sudden there's been a flood, which, yes, is absolutely devastating. But this is part of being an administration, part of being in governance, is you have to deal with multiple things. You have to, what's the word? You have to be able to do many things at the same time. Multitask, that's the word I'm looking for. right? So you can't say vote for me because I will expose this, because this was an issue primarily with the left and the deep state, and then say, oh, suddenly it's not important. What's happened? This is like the same time Trump was elected, Jason. He was elected because he was a conservative, and then as soon as he got in there, I don't know if he knew about it or he was hoodwinked, and he suddenly got on board with this Operation Warp Speed. I mean, talk about losing faith in governance. I've lost complete faith in all of them.
Well, I've been arguing for some time, and I think even on this show, that Operation Warp Speed was essential, because the alternative was we would be in lockdown for 10 years or so waiting for an approved vaccine, which made no sense. So he did it to literally cause them to cheat the system, break the system, and kick their own goals, if you will. So that's one that's really hard for people to appreciate. But what was the alternative at that point? If there was no vaccine and there was fear, would they have just waited and kept people locked down for eternity, or did that speed up the process?
Victoria. Jason, it didn't help us in Victoria. Long after that so-called vaccine remedy appeared, we were locked down. So, I mean, that might be an argument for America, but it didn't work in Australia. You know, like I say, we need legislation. There are so many laws protecting elections and integrity, not that we believe in that either, but there is no legislation protecting voters to say that when someone runs on a platform on policy promises, that they are upheld to those policy promises. None of them keep their promises, none of them. And yet we, oh my goodness, we're held to such high standards that they never need to meet.
Well, back on the vaccines here in Australia, in New South Wales. So when the vaccines rolled out in February or whatever it was, April, by the time they sort of got going, it wasn't until October that people were allowed out. Can you believe allowed? I'm even saying it like that. 1st of October, the vaccinated were allowed out, and the unvaccinated had to wait till the 1st of December. And at the time, Dominic Perrottet, then Premier of New South Wales, went on to the 2GB radio show with Ray Hadley, and Hadley let him have it. And it resulted in Perrottet coming out and saying, well, actually what we've done is we've now decided to keep the unvaccinated locked up until December the 15th, gave them another 2 weeks of Ray Hadley-induced penitentiary for not taking the poison. And that was a true story. So, but could you imagine if there was, based on that, if there was no vaccine, they would have kept us locked in eternal rollout until that point. And we've proven beyond doubt at this point that they didn't serve any purpose from the perspective of transmission, so it didn't matter. And of course, they then knew it would let rip and it would cause people to catch this virus. So the preventative medicine, which is what it was meant to do, never was going to do that in the first place. The narrative switched and then said, oh, but it stops hospitalisation and death, which is total bullshit. We've proven that with the New South Wales respiratory health documents that came out each week, and we've even launched freedom of information requests to find out how it was that people who weren't hospitalised or in ICU suddenly died if they were unvaccinated. Was that an indication that these people were actually vaccinated, but within the 2-week window before they were counted as vaccinated? And that's what we asked the FOI, which they deflected that information, but they didn't say, no, it wasn't. They kind of deflected. So we kind of got them over the ropes there. That was an FOI I did with Sydney Uni pharmacist Raphael Latasta back a few months ago. Meanwhile, back onto the Epstein story.
Can I just have something to say about that?
Yep.
I think it's about time we find lawful remedy to discover if our countries were on a war footing, because I have intel privately that we all were and still are on a war footing in our nations, right? Which would sort of explain the Albanese result, because, you know, people stay in power when you're on a war footing. Because if our countries were on a war footing in any way during this period, 2020 to 2025, then any moves against civilians which harm them is a war crime. That's what we need to find out.
Well, COVID is, whichever way you look at it, when it becomes...
We're non-combatants. You know what, Jason? There is evidence in a case in America, in the Pfizer whistleblower case, where their defense, Pfizer, was that the injections were a military countermeasure. It's in black and white. I've got it on my laptop. So military countermeasures occur during wartime. But you know what I mean? We need to find out these details, because crimes have clearly been committed here.
Yes.
And
Yes.
crimes being committed in the UK, by the way, this new UK Act, the what's it called? The National Security Strategy 2025, which I've shared. I've sent you a screenshot. It's called the National Security Strategy 2025. And on
Yep.
the first page in Keir Starmer's opening letter in this document, he talks about internationalism, how this is going to benefit internationalism. That's globalism rebranded. He just didn't want to write
Yes.
the word. Now, Vladimir Putin is not out there making threats to the UK. Quite the opposite. He said publicly that he won't make moves on any European countries. So why is he literally stating that Vladimir Putin is this terrible tyrant that intends on coming after Britons in the UK? That is simply not true. And that is a contradictory document saying a national strategy to help internationalism. You know, these people are doing this in plain sight, and we don't seem to have any legal remedy for it.
No, we don't have it at all. When we have a system that appears to be protecting itself and
Very much so.
not wanting to serve the people of which it's there for. And there lies obviously the problem that keeps compounding. I remember talking to Philip Altman in one of my regular interviews when he came on one day and he said that this was a military operation. He just came out and said that I've got the evidence to show you. So that certainly piqued my interest at that point, because we're all trying to work out how this, where does Fauci fit in? Where does the gain of function fit in? Where does the move to Wuhan fit in? The money to EcoHealth Alliance fit in? And now all of a sudden it's a military operation. I actually interviewed a doctor who worked at Fort Detrick, where part of this COVID scenario was being developed. Now, I don't know if people can remember, but Dr. Shiva came out in the very beginning and he said that there was multiple places that it was being developed, COVID. First of all, there was Wuhan. Then, of course, there was he named Fort Detrick as another one, and he said the problem with the one that they developed at Fort Detrick, it was too strong. And once it got out, it killed 4 or 5 people, and the virus didn't have time to transmit. In other words, they got it, they died. And so you needed a virus that was able to be more transmissible so that people didn't die before other people caught it. So when I spoke to this Dr. Rothstein from Fort Detrick, he told me, yeah, they were doing experiments and he was involved in other experiments in the past, but this is what they were working on. So Fort Detrick specifically is involved in this sort of bioweaponry.
University Chapel Hill, that was the place where Obama closed down gain-of-function research and then took it over to Wuhan in China. I sent you this clip from Business Money this morning that said, and this is one of the reasons why, obviously, how Britain's excess COVID deaths have cut the state pension burden by 1.5 billion. Well, there's something to celebrate. We've saved money, Jason.
Isn't it nice when they tell you their ulterior motive as an unexpected consequence when you know that it was an expected consequence?
Who benefits?
Yeah,
isn't it?
Exactly.
Who benefits? Yeah.
Exactly. Now, I want to go back on to the Epstein stuff for a minute. I want to present to you some different perspectives that have popped up. So the first one is this particular graphic here. So we showed you earlier. So The Guardian's reporting that top House Democrats are demanding the release of Epstein files that mention Trump. Jamie Raskin and 15 others accused the Justice Department of withholding the files to protect him. And then another one on the Hill, Raskin demands the release of any Epstein files mentioning Trump, the Jack Smith report, which is also interesting. Now, then this one pops up. Roger Stone said, why would Steve Bannon meet with Jeffrey Epstein both at his New York home and in Paris after Epstein was convicted of sex crimes in Florida? Why would he approach Epstein for his 60 Minutes appearance? And Elon Musk says, because Bannon's in the Epstein files. Well, these are all interesting provocations here because, of course, no one knows this, but let's just keep the story brewing. Now, Elon Musk on a situation here says, how can we expect to have faith in Trump if he won't release the Epstein files? Will exposing the Epstein files rank high on the America Party's list? Elon Musk, 100%. Well, there you go. So Elon Musk is in support for that. Ironically, Elon Musk has been photographed with Ghislaine Maxwell, so that's fine. We bring it out. We want the truth to come to the surface. So let's get on to
the MAGA movement took to the streets to get Trump elected to do just that. So what now? The MAGA movement leaves MAGA, goes over to Elon Musk, takes to the streets so that we can find out the truth. Do you really think that we would find out the truth? We've tried. We've done everything. We've used people power. It didn't work. They are not going to tell us because of what I said yesterday. They were on the job. This was an operation, and we don't get to know about operations.
Well, let's put that together, park it for a moment, and let's go to this one. Is Trump in the files? So Alex Jones says, I've investigated Trump for 10 years looking for any connection to Epstein's crimes and found zero evidence. David Schoen, who represented Jeffrey Epstein, was hired to his defense as a criminal lawyer 9 days before he died. He sought my advice for months before that. I can say authoritatively, unequivocally, and definitively that I had no information to hurt President Trump. Then 1776 guy on Twitter says, the Epstein stuff isn't finished, not by a long shot. You're witnessing a bait and switch. You're witnessing the deep state being lulled into a false sense of security. You're witnessing consent being manufactured for the full release of the files. Why? Because all sectors are now officially enraged over the perceived rug pull. Lefties, righties, moderates, blue pill, red pill, Q pill, doesn't matter. Now everyone is screaming for the release and transparency of the Epstein files, and that, my friends, is how you manufacture consent so that when the time comes to do what must be done, the public writ large will accept it. So that's
Okay.
a big call.
Can I just say that as a woman and having watched also Trump over a long period of time, I will say, as a childhood sexual abuse survivor, there isn't a gray area. There is a massive line in the sand between men who are attracted to children and men who are attracted to women. And in my humble opinion, Trump is attracted to women, like most men, probably a bit too much because that's the way, the biological world works. But I think there's plenty of evidence, and the Democrats try to take him out for it, that he's very attracted to adult women. So I'm not questioning this because I think Trump is on the list, but I want to know why this promise was broken.
And that's what we all want to know. So if I go on strategy now, I'll give you one more. This is Liz Crokin, who many of us hold in high regard, who's paid a heavy price for breaking the Pizzagate story, and has been attacked and threatened and all sorts of stuff. So a lot of people are waiting for her response. This is what she put up. How do you get the media to cover Jeffrey Epstein? How do you get both your MAGA base and Democrats, including top house Democrats rightly to be pissed off and fired up about Epstein, so they demand justice and the release of the files for his child sex trafficking ring and blackmail operation? Guess what? The whole world now knows that Epstein was not just running a sex trafficking ring, he was also running a blackmail operation and working for or with intelligence agencies such as the CIA and Mossad. Kudos to the reporter who asked Trump about that today. So people can panic all they want. I'm sitting here comfy and cozy eating popcorn. So it's hard, and I tell you what, it's the same pattern that we've watched for years on years on years. But Trump himself has called out Epstein in the past publicly. Now he makes out and draws it in like no one can do, Mr. Narrative Switcher, to make it look like he's covering up when we know that there's nothing there. But to get Jamie Raskin to suddenly be the good guy and Eric Swalwell, that's what I love about this game of chess. It makes me crazy. Yesterday I was, a little bit down on myself, and then I just thought, there's no way in the world at this point that you would, if you're a supporter, that you would jump ship in this particular information war, although many people would want to do that. So I watch on. I remain. It's a test, but I also remain quietly confident about what's happening. But I also love the fact that supporters. This is the beautiful thing about independent, free-thinking, free will media. You're allowed to go off and do your own work and do your own research and seemingly get better. Some of us will make mistakes and for that reason should probably step down and retire. And I'm not saying, of course, us, but there are people out there that get a lot of things wrong, do it for clicks and all sorts of stuff and whatever, and they're going to be found out.
But a lot of these people do say this is for entertainment only. So when they say that, I think you should switch off. Straight away, I think you should switch off because it means they can say whatever they want.
Yep, exactly right. And then it just becomes just nonsense. It's just a form of, as you said, entertainment. So that doesn't really mean a whole lot. So having said that, the timing of this next headline is immense. Take a look. The FBI has announced launching a criminal investigation of John Brennan and James Comey, according to the same Department of Justice sources who yesterday told us there was no case in the Epstein files. So the CIA Director John Ratcliffe has referred Brennan for pardon me, criminal investigation to the FBI, sources have now told Fox News Digital. That is a massive story. So at long last, we're finally going to see something. So what we'll do is I will now play you part of the clip from Devin Nunes with Maria Bartiromo. It's quite interesting how far it's come, where Nunes is pointing the finger at, and some of the recollections of Maria at the end of this short piece. Take a look.
I want to get your take first on the Russia collusion part of that interview. What struck you?
I was fascinated. There's nobody better than Kash and Dan, or I should say Director Patel and Deputy Director Bongino. Those two guys know more about the Russia hoax than anyone else that's out there. And I'm going to be fascinated to see what this new information is that they found buried somewhere within that Hoover building, because I do think that transparency is key. And, now that we have, Ed Martin, who was supposed to be the U.S. Attorney in Washington, D.C., now the president has appointed him to go after this. So I think both Kash and Dan were pretty clear. They're going to follow the facts. They're going to provide transparency. And then ultimately it's up to the Department of Justice to hold these dirty cops responsible for what they've drugged this country through for the last almost decade now.
Well, you've called Jim Comey like a figurehead, but talked about others who are really driving this lie. Let me ask you this. Who do you believe was the mastermind behind the Russia collusion lie?
Well, there's a lot of masterminds, but I think in general, this was lit on fire by Obama, Team Obama and his team after Trump won in 2016. So they could have stopped it. They should have stopped it. Instead, they lit the fuse. They put out a BS intelligence report, if you recall, right before the president came in. They framed General Flynn. They framed the entire Trump administration. And then they appointed Mueller. So once Trump fired Comey, Mueller gets appointed. And then we lived through that Mueller witch hunt for years. And I think, me personally, I think if you're going to find criminality, it's going to be with Mueller and his witch hunters that were there for so many years. I think that's where you're going to find the corruption. So it wasn't just I said this many times, Maria, and I think it was lost on people. It wasn't just about all the corruption that they did to create and manufacture the Russia hoax. The Mueller investigation itself was a hoax and was illegal. When Mueller walked into that door, how many times did I say it? He said, "Where are the Russians?" "Oh, sir, there are none." Why didn't Mueller leave? Why did all those people work for years? Why did they hide the information from Congress for so many years? I think you're going to find many of those top-level lawyers and FBI agents, as Kash said, did not conduct themselves in a professional manner. And I think if interviewed again, you could maybe get to the bottom of it. But look, you have two guys that want to get to the bottom of it. I have every faith that they will. We'll have to deal with it one day at a time.
I mentioned just Judge Boasberg. He was the one who gave Kevin Kleinsmith a smack on the wrist when Kevin Kleinsmith said, no, Carter Page is not a CIA asset, which he was. And what did he get? Community service. And here comes Judge Boasberg again, trying to stop President Trump on the immigration plans.
Yeah, every time you peel something back here, Maria, what we learn is the corruption was much worse than what we thought. And I think because President Trump has come in, he's cleaning things out, he's putting good people in. Now what we're dealing with is the last part the left owns are the judges.
I tell you what.
Marry me, Maria. Marry me. She's another one of my American Girl crushes.
She's brilliant, and I love the way that you learn a lot as a budding journalist by the way that she gets the questions in. She raises her voice when she needs to, and she cuts off. And she's working in a very different format to what we do in independent media, where we have the luxury of a bit more time. So the luxury is that we get people to speak for longer, and you get more detail. But in that compact form, in that 5-minute interview, and we cut it down to 3, she's got to get it out of Nunes in that time because she's serving a different purpose, and she's just brilliant and fires in there.
I feel she's very like us. She's very like us, Jason. She cuts people off. She asks the difficult questions. She puts them on the spot. And you can tell with Maria Bartiromo that sometimes she's asking questions that they weren't told about before they got there, because they have to actually do that criminal thing and think. They have to say, okay, well, and that's how you can tell. When someone fires back with an answer straight away online, you're guaranteed they've been given the questions. And let me just reassure viewers to this show, we don't give people people the questions beforehand. And even if they ask us to ask a couple of questions that they're very knowledgeable on, we add to it and we ask them things they weren't expecting. And that's what Maria does. And that's what makes her great. I think she's only on Sundays, isn't she, Jason, on Fox?
I believe so, but every week we get some chestnut from Maria.
Yeah.
Now,
totally.
so I just want to bring you up to speed with some interesting details that are propping up. So now we've got Jesse Waters covering the fact that there's a criminal investigation into these two characters. The man on the left, the former head of the CIA, the man on the right, the former head of the FBI, both in the frame for Russiagate. Now, let's have a look at this one. This is from Michael Flynn, General Flynn. I'm very thankful to hear the news. Both of these corrupt individuals must be held accountable for their actions to undermine a duly elected president. Go pick up Clapper for questioning tonight, and the investigation of these two will go much quicker. Massive statement from General Michael Flynn. There were indications that he would come back into the main. Now, I want to take you one step further. Take a look at this. It might be a little bit small. This is a Q thing. Look at the date, July 8, 2019. So that's 6 years ago. And it claims there Pfizer is the beginning and Robert Mueller. To the day, 6 years ago, Pfizer is the start. I tell you what, that is more than a coincidence. And we were told that the Russiagate hoax would be where it would start. The fact that Epstein was the close, they've put it to rest for the time being to get everyone fired up in the center, and now they're going down the Russiagate hoax. John Brennan is a very nervous man, James Comey a very nervous man, and Clapper the same. Clapper replaced by Tulsi Gabbard in that position to give you an idea of who he was. But Michael Flynn, who may well be Q himself, is now looking at a very, very different game. So I just remain quietly confident that this information war, we don't understand what's going on, but I tell you what, I'm nowhere near as uncomfortable as I was yesterday, and the hopelessness that I may have felt today, I feel again re-energized by this story once again.
That's your hopium. I still feel dejected. Does it not feel, and this is just my humble opinion, does it not feel, and I always look at what's missing, words and narratives that are missing, not the ones we're being fed, rammed down our throat like a goose for pâté de foie gras. Look at the words and the phrases and the ideals that are missing. It really feels to me like whoever these people are, those who we must disobey from this point on, that they engineered a civil war against populations in the Five Eyes nations. And what Trump is doing for America is halting that civil war against populations. However, in Canada, the UK, New Zealand, and Australia, the civil war rolls on. That's what it looks like as a very simplistic overview to me.
I agree with you 100%. It's globalists versus nationalists. Let me show you something that has just popped up. And if you are an average person right now and you're an American and you still believe in the American dream, take a look at this. Popping it up there. My order today, thanks to my boss, the President of the United States, will allow for Americans to use their rent to qualify for a mortgage. Credit history will no longer just include credit cards and loans. This is huge.
Now, that is huge, and that's extremely fair, because endless amounts of people are paying what is a mortgage payment in rent every week, every month, and they're paying it off on someone else's mortgage. So how has that never been evidence enough of your capacity and ability to pay? And in fact, you're more likely to pay your mortgage than rent, because if you don't pay your rent, they're going to kick you out. But if you don't pay your mortgage, you lose your home. And a home is a very different thing. You can paint it how you want. Change it how you want. You can bang nails into the walls and you can build something. So I think that's fantastic news. That is true hopium. I'll take that. I'll take that pill. And yeah, like I said, the war against Americans, it seems, is grinding down. It's slowing down, right? But the one thing that Trump needs to do is this mRNA debacle. So that's ongoing, and they've already started the push against that, and they may fall, right? All you have to do is ask for evidence of safety. They can't provide it, and hopefully that will fall down. The Epstein thing, do I think that they are sort of entrapping the Democrats to be calling for it? There aren't any Democrats on the streets calling for it, are they? They're on the streets to save the planet and get rid of Teslas and get rid of Trump. But there aren't any Democrats being paid by Democrats, $250 a day or whatever, to take to the streets to say, release the Epstein list. Perhaps that's what they want. Because then they'd say, oh, shucks, okay, here you go, Bill, here you go, Hillary. Look, if there's people of note, and we know that there are, look, I think we live in a world where people with extreme wealth who don't want for anything, don't worry about anything, have complete peace. We don't have that when we're struggling to survive. They have complete peace and contentment. You know, the devil makes work for idle hands. They sit around and let their money make money. And it's becoming evident that a large majority of people who have extreme wealth, they feel that nothing is off limits. A lot of these people do think having sexual relationships with a child is okay. And we know they think that because there are politicians and a former prime minister in Australia on a pedophile list, a pedophile ring, sharing stuff, and their names have been redacted because it wouldn't be good for public confidence. And unfortunately, the rest of us in the 99%, we're not wired like that. So they're busy trying to make us the bad guys because we're damaging the climate, or we're not taking health advice, or we're not paying twice as much for a mortgage than we should pay. But we are being governed by criminally minded, perversely minded individuals. And you don't need to question that. You only need to look at their moves to change education and the way we speak and deal with our children in our countries to see that that is absolutely what they're trying to do. Some of these books that have come out for children are appalling. They talk about fisting. They talk about anal sex. They talk about this, dare I even say the words, these things called circle jerks. And they've even got these, you know, my son told me this was going around his private Catholic school 2 years ago. The Democrats have now got these pictures and it looks like the UN sign, all different colors, and all these boys, you know, holding on to each other's parts. They are trying to desecrate and denigrate our children. They are trying to get rid of Christianity and Jesus Christ. They are trying to destroy our faith socially, psychologically, and I truly believe chemically with these injections, detach us from our soul, detach us from our morality, damage that pineal gland, you know, calcify it up so we don't even realize what's happening to us anymore. And these are the people that are governing us, Jason. So all I expect from leaders from anywhere, from any party that stand, as you say, in authority and responsibility above us, is that they show us that they will lead by example. They're not leading by example, and we need them to do that. That's actually what we pay them for, not to run around being criminals and perverse. It's got to stop. We've got to disobey these people, and there are parts of all constitutions that say you have a responsibility as a citizen in your country to disobey these people.
I'm thinking there a recollection of Justin Trudeau. One of the first things he did when he became Prime Minister was to lower the age of consent for homosexuality to 14 for boys. And just another example of what you're talking about, this slide into permissiveness, which really it's the cover story for permissiveness that they're expecting to be able to get away with. The funny thing is that all of this stuff happened so quickly after the Pizzagate story broke. That's what really forced. It was like the trans movement just went ballistic. The movement towards underage, etc., moved very quickly and somewhat not delicately because it came out there. But I almost felt that the trans movement was a gateway to move into the next step. That this is this whole alphabet soup that we have and the flags, etc., and this celebration of pride, etc., was to deliberately blur the areas. And I know from my own friends,
trans adults that I know, and I don't know many, but the trans adults that I do know are against this with children. So let me just say that. So again, we're using a minority group, like we use the Aboriginals to steal land off people. You know, these people are being used, and it turns society against them. It's absolutely appalling. I mean, what they're doing with migrants as well is turning society, or trying to turn them against migrants. And then they go, oh, don't be racist. But then they talk about building them homes and education. Albo does clips at a primary school where there's not a single blonde-haired Aussie kid. I mean, isn't diversity? Why is it exclusionary of Australians? It's very odd what they're doing. They're really mixing up a soup. And like I said, it feels like a civil war against us, and we never hear those words, and that makes me suspicious.
No, absolutely. Now, we're more than halfway through the show, and I thought it might be a good time to mention our brand new foundation member, Judy. Thank you so much for upgrading your plan and becoming number 7, which is really, really cool in doing that. Yeah, so lucky 7 indeed. And so for those of you that want to continue supporting the Daily Australian, I'll just put this up on the screen for you now. You can help support independent media with our $75 annual plan that's currently available. You can also become a foundation member at the reduced price of it's $245 down from $350, and then you get to be a numbered person, etc., as a supporter of the Daily Australian. You do that via the dailyaustralian.substack.com is where you can subscribe, and you can be part of it. And as part of that plan, you get access to the exclusive TDA Unchained, where we have a chat about things off the record, I suppose, and off the original show. And it's a little bit daring, a little bit fun. And the last one we did was it was terrific because it was highly controversial in terms of topics, but it was good fun to explore how we see the world differently, and then of course how it comes together, who's really controlling what's going on and how much we don't know, and that's part of the story. So thanks everyone for your continued support, and of course to our brand new foundation member, Judy.
Thanks, Judy. We really appreciate it. And I'll just ask all of our viewers a question. If someone said to you, if you pay $250 into the mainstream media en masse, and suddenly when you turn on the news at 6, you'd get the truth, the real truth, and nothing but the truth, would you pay it? Of course you would. Of course you would. It's not going to happen. You're not going to get that kind of offer because they want millions and millions of dollars from Big Pharma and all the people who have harmed you. So I think, who doesn't like a good deal, Jason? $350 down to $245 on the foundation member. How fantastic. You're literally building us up, and we rely on that. So we really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Well, let's continue now, and I'm going to cross to the land of the long white cloud. And in New Zealand, a GP must pay $65,000. Would you believe it, for prescribing ivermectin? So I'll give you some of the details. She's from Southland, and Dr. Sophie February, registered medical practitioner of Mataura, whose suppression order has lapsed, has had previous charges of misconduct upheld by the New Zealand Health Practitioners Disciplinary Tribunal. Can you believe misconduct for prescribing and sourcing ivermectin? So as a result, the tribunal ordered her to take and successfully complete an educational program approved by the Medical Council about critical appraisal skills so research could be analysed appropriately. She was formally censured and ordered to pay a total of $67,000, comprising nearly $40,000 contribution towards professional conduct committee costs and $27,000 for the tribunal's costs. And for 3 years, she'll be required to advise any workplace of the tribunal's decisions. I'll tell you what, if you were this doctor, Sophie, you'd kind of want to go into your own practice. And I reckon you would have hundreds, if not thousands of patients. Your books would be full in a matter of weeks for being a tough one, literally serving the people and sticking it to the system. So I don't necessarily going to say go and encourage, but it will be interesting to watch Dr. Sophie's career from this point to see what she does.
Look at that face. Leave that up there. Look at that face. If my doctor had that face, I'd be delighted. I love my doctor, but I would be absolutely delighted. Isn't it funny how everything's 180? It's the wrong way round. All of these doctors that did the right thing should actually be receiving compensation now, because it's critical thinking. It's like soldiers, isn't it? And police officers. You want them to be trained to be able to think critically and independently. Sure, you've got to follow orders and there's procedures and you have to get your master's degrees and all that. But you also have to think critically on the spot. There's a doctor in Australia, I interviewed her on my podcast, called called Dr. Miley Trin. She's an amazing lady. So she had a patient that was dying during the pandemic of COVID because this patient had really severe underlying health issues, which COVID contributed to. And what she did is she prescribed ivermectin, and it saved the patient's life. And she's lost her license as well. And, you know, all this happened. She prescribed it before ivermectin was banned in Australia. And she still lost her license, and she's still in court, and she doesn't have it back. So honestly, all of these doctors who think critically, and in that case, the patient was saved, and it means nothing. It means nothing in the eyes of the court. Oh, right, the patient was dying, she was struggling, and now she's saved. No, doesn't mean anything. The money should be going in the other direction. All of these doctors who did the right thing should be compensated. How dare they take that young woman's money?
And that in lies the problem in a corrupt system, that it uses the system against the people, and the transparency
Weaponized.
there. It's weaponized against them, and therefore the transparency is what brings it to the surface. And only now we're finding out about this particular doctor ordered to pay effectively, you know, a year's wages, $65,000 after tax, or 67 is a substantial amount of money, and a punishment for saving people's lives. And at the same time, those that went about going the other way, harming, don't have a case to answer. Thank you, Norman Swan on the ABC. Not working out where all the cancers are coming from. It could be the antibiotic use. It could be could be too much sunlight. It could be the fact that you're drinking too much soft drink. And certainly can't be the fact that you use an experimental medication that it turns out has been reported to cause cancers. But we will not look at that. So authority, once again, you're getting your butt kicked as usual because you are lying to the people, and in there it lies. Staying in New Zealand now, Nicola, I'll give you this story. New Zealand first, that's the party of Winston Peters, has introduced a bill to protect cash transactions. So businesses selling goods or services worth less than $500 would have to accept cash payments under that proposed law. So there are people saying, well, hang on a second, what about if you're spending $600 or $800 or $10,000? Must you accept cash? And they're sort of saying, well, no, you've got the option. But the point there is that the idea that you don't need to, that you still want to maintain the use of cash. So it's a step in the right direction, not necessarily enough of a step in the right direction, but at the very least, it is a movement to say that at the very least we've got a baseline, and you can't just make us go cashless. So again, this is this whole idea of politics and 51 versus 49. You've got to be able to do something that people go, oh yeah, I'll support that. Remembering, of course, that that people are largely held in check in the political system due to party solidarity, etc., and reasons why they can't vote against it. So that's a logical political maneuver to, at least at the basics, ensure that you can't get rid of cash in New Zealand. So we'll watch and see what happens with that story.
Interesting in Australia, Jason, a friend of mine this week was offered a better deal than she expected on a car if she paid cash for it, just like a second car, and was very nervous about going into an Australian bank and asking for a hell of a big lump of cash that day, like with no notice, because we keep hearing that banks in Australia won't hand over the cash, and gave it to her straight away.
Oh,
so they may have pulled their heads in, Jason, in the banks.
Isn't that interesting how this system is a little bit selective? Now, in Australian news, so there's the first story is that the Reserve Bank decided to not lower interest rates as people were expecting yesterday. So the cash rate stays on hold at 3.85%. Now, interestingly, it was 2 months ago was the last cut. Now, in my household, we had to wait the full 30 days before being notified by our lender. And then they only passed on 0.1 of the 0.25. So they decided to keep 0.15 for themselves for their rising costs and profitability. Oh, yeah, they can do whatever they like on a variable home loan rate. And they have been doing it they've been doing it for many years. This is a new trend, probably maybe 6 or 7 years that they started trying to get away. Maybe it's longer. Someone might be able to correct me on that one. But it wasn't always that case. It was a convention that you just passed it on. So, but I do recall just this is my memory working for me. When home loan rates were 6.49% retail, I remember the cash rate was 4.75. So there was about a 1.74% margin. So now at 3.85, people would be paying around 6%. So the margin's roughly 2.15, if that makes sense. So they've fattened the gap there on what they buy and what they sell for. Now, having said that, I've also worked with lenders in the past, small brokers, etc., and they said, "Oh, we don't buy our money at 3.85 like the cash rate is there. We would be paying a premium as well, so we might be paying 4.85 and then selling it as a lender for 5.5. So, in other words, our profitability is only 0.65, and out of that, we've got to run our business, advertising, marketing, and all of that stuff. So everyone's sort of making a cut along the way. Where it's interesting is if you are a borrower of money from a lending institution that you might advertise. And so the idea was that you would pay 3.85% to the general public for a deposit on a term deposit when you get some sort of accuracy. It was only when ING entered the market that they were paying over the odds and might be paying 4%, 4.25% to get that money in and then lend it out. So this is the competition that was meant to come about by the lending. At the end of the day.
Do you hear that? Do you hear that, Australians who borrow money from banks? That you're not just borrowing money in a mortgage, you're paying for some of their marketing and advertising. Would you still stay on if you knew that was going to happen? I don't think so.
Well, at the end of the day, it's a business one way or another, but it does introduce the idea of
bank fees. Jason, do you know how much money bank fees every time you tap that card, right? When you don't use cash and you use digital, every time you tap that card, every time you go to an ATM, $1, $2, $2.50, right? Some places it's more than that. They make every second they're making millions and millions of dollars, Jason. They do not need to do that to you with your mortgage. I think that's disgusting. I think it's criminal. And this is why we need banking reform, which I think Gerard Rennick, when he was a senator, was trying to talk about.
Well, that's true. And then you look at the Citizens Party and the work that Robbie Barwick has done in there. And it might be worth actually reaching out to Robbie to find out where any of that development is. Robbie's a terrific Victorian and a great wealth of information. Very, very hard work. I'll reach out to Robbie and see if we can invite him onto the show. That'd be really cool. Now, in other news, we've touched on the RBA, we've touched on New Zealand. Well, here's another breaking story for you today. Donald Trump has threatened tariffs on one of Australia's biggest exports. He has threatened to introduce tariffs of up to 200% on pharmaceuticals in a move that could hurt one of Australia's biggest exports to the US. Speaking to the media before a cabinet meeting, the president suggested the very, very high levies on pharmaceuticals would not go into effect immediately, saying he would give drug manufacturers about a year and a half to respond and relocate their operations to the United States. How about that? The tariffs there are going to be at a very high rate, like 200%. Well, that sort of...
Read between the lines, Jason. What are they doing in Australia? Monash University, what are they doing? They're building these massive mRNA factories to make lots of money. I think they probably know that Australians have probably gone off that product somewhat. There's not many left that aren't injured, really. I just actually tweeted out this morning, we've got another friend in his 40s who's developed a spinal tumor. Now, my neighbor at the bottom of my garden, who was retired with a beautiful husband and he used to potter in the shed, he got a spinal tumor just weeks after getting the jab and he died on the operating table. And guess what the doctors said to our friend that has a spinal tumor? You better hope it goes away on its own, because if it doesn't, there's nothing we can do.
So in other words, there is nothing we can do.
No. There's nothing we can do.
Well, I would hope that your friend has access to Dr. William Makis and is able to have a look at the work that he is doing. And of course, it's anecdotal, but it's powerful. And at the very least, there's a new approach that's going on.
He doesn't believe it's the jab. He doesn't believe it's the jab.
So that's also interesting. But Makis is just having enormous success with certain therapies. And so that's something for people to look into. And of course, everyone's up to their own at that point. Look, when my mum got sick with, when both my parents passed away, I've talked about it from cancer. Dad got diagnosed with esophageal cancer, which is genuine. You'd normally only diagnosed very, very late. And it was only when they discovered ascites fluid. Dad thought he had a leaking heart valve. That was what he kept saying. and then they discovered ascites fluid, and they said, no, that's end stage cancer, and so it wasn't very good. So they started to drain it. They basically said, there's nothing we can do. There's no treatment at this stage. And he only lasted 100 days from diagnosis. It was horrific. But one of the things, and he'd only recently been remarried. He had a 3-year-old son, my little brother, and it was about as bad as you could possibly hope for. What we decided to do was, again, there was nothing treatment-wise at the time. This was 18 years ago. Was we decided to record a video with Dad, a movie, a documentary. And so I recorded Dad in time, in the times that I could sort of get him when he was feeling up to it. And what I noticed was that we chronicled this thing, and we watch it back, periodically on his anniversary and things like that. But how quickly he went downhill. He didn't speak for the last 10 days of his life. He didn't eat for the last 10 days of his life. He just couldn't. It obviously filled up, and he didn't speak for the last 2 or 3 days. He was on morphine. It was horrific. But he did manage to speak to his granddaughter, my daughter, sort of his last words, and I was there when he passed. It was, I was glad I was there. Horrific to see. What was also the funny things that happened was that my dad was a big horse racing fan, big punter, had a lot of fun. The day after he passed away, there was an announcement that all racing in the east coast of Australia was cancelled due to some weird thing that had gone, some bug or something. And in fact, right. Sydney racing had been cancelled for months after that point. And one of his best friends at the funeral got up and said that was actually in honour of Barry, my father, that they closed down racing because of his passing. That was the case, and it's weird how the universe works. In Mum's case, and I've talked about that, she had cardiac angiosarcoma, heart cancer, which is possibly the rarest cancer of all. No one's ever heard of heart cancer, and it occurs in the right aorta, and there was 4 genuine triggers for that. But Mum was able to experiment with some sort of therapies, etc., to give her a chance, even though she believed in the system, was a nurse, went through the whole vaccine thing, but was she said, I will try anything, and she did to that point, and it worked really well. So I just say to anyone in those circumstances, two different approaches there. But in Mum's case, they also said 3 months is all you're going to get. She got 11 and a half months and got to see the birth of her grandson, who was born on my father's 70th birthday, who'd already passed. So and it was like a reincarnation. So in that, I would just say you are the master of your domain. That's the point I want to make to this. So please don't ever think that just because someone else tells you there's nothing that can be done, that you can't try something else. You always have the right to try. You always have to do different things. And the fact that this beautiful Dr. Sophie was punished for giving people the right to try is one of the greatest blights on humanity. How dare they do that and then go about this business of fining them because they think they're in authority? I reckon we put Dr. Sophie's record up against all these other clowns in New Zealand over their COVID record, and I reckon London to a brick, Sophie wins every single time. So for all people out there suffering, I'm saddened that you are. I support you in any way, and if there's any way here at the Daily Australian we can provide access to information, that is what we will do to help you all, whichever way we possibly can, because we don't know what we don't know. And I guarantee you those doctors like Norman Swan out there on the ABC, they haven't got a bloody clue either. They just pretend that they do.
Let's do this. If you're a viewer of this show, and you don't need to be a foundational member or anything fancy, if you are a viewer of this show, and thank you for sharing your stories, Jason, it's really important for people, email us at thedailyaustralian@gmail.com if you would like us to honor your fallen relative during this time in history. Let's do our own bloody Forest of the Fallen. When you lose someone and they mean something to you, if you would like us to put up their photo and have people remember who's fallen because of what's going on here, we will do that. thedailyaustralian@gmail.com. We'd love to do that for you. I don't know if I sent you this slide, Jason. It's actually from The Telegraph. And it is a headline in the UK saying that chemotherapy may spread cancer and trigger more aggressive tumors, warn scientists. And my feeling is that I'm not someone that agrees with chemotherapy. I wouldn't choose that as an option myself, but I understand that some people would. My feeling is that they may actually be running out of chemotherapy drugs, Jason, because so many people have cancer right now.
That's another interesting perspective, isn't it? Yeah, when Mum chose to do the chemo, that the professor advised it was a direct chemo into the heart, and he said you're going to be very sick. but it's experimental, etc. Now, he said, but you've accepted it and that's the way it is. Now, I have mentioned this before, that Mum was using medicinal cannabis at the time in its very early stages here in Australia. And the irony was that the tumours were shrinking and she had absolutely no side effects from the chemo, none. So I would ring her up. I'd ring her up. I said, so are you taking the medicine? She said, I'm taking a little bit at night, a little bit in the morning as instructed. And I said, so how are you feeling? She said, well, normal. She said, I take it, I sit down, I read a book, and but I go and have chemo, and I don't. The only thing that happened is I lost my hair, but I'm not vomiting. I've got no side effects. And in matter of fact, she said, I feel good today, so I'm going out on the boat. Mum went to work 3 weeks before she died, despite the fact that the tumor had grown to the size of a grapefruit in her right aorta. She still managed to get to work because she was still feeling okay, even though her breathing was laboured and stuff like that. She worked as a flight nurse at Air Ambulance, and at that time she was on ground duties, but she still did it. A genuine article. And you remember when John Latta, when we were on?
Yeah, I was just going to mention that.
yeah. So John knew Mum and raved about her, as many did. So look, I'm honouring my mum in this. So thank you for the indulgence. But we all have parents that we adore and loved ones that we adore, and your home is here on the Daily Australian, and we will honour them on your behalf too. Thank you. That's a great initiative, Nicola. Thanks.
Yeah, we'll do that. Whether we do it in the show or at the end of the show,
Yes.
we'll do a memorial segment. It will be absolutely beautiful. I would love to do that for you. I think it's a great idea because, we started this show for you people because there was something missing in the conversation in Australia. And obviously the thing that was missing was the truth. It was heart. It was soul. It's still missing. These people are like soulless drones. They report what the government tell them to report. And when they do have a human interest story, it's usually something very salacious so they can get their clicks up. Well, here on the Daily Australian, we talk about everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we know you appreciate that. So please use us, send in your lost people, and we'll do a memorial for them.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, the best part about our show is that whilst all the stories are there, it is organic. So we do go out of order in sequence, and that really did feel like a wonderful, happy ending. But I do want to give you a couple more stories before you go that are important. Otherwise, I would hold them over until tomorrow. But let's do them anyway. I'll do them as quickly as I can. I want to just show you now in the UK. This has come out of the UK Parliament, talking about pandemic preparedness. I guess it's appropriate at this point that you're all going to sigh of whatever, but let's show you where the reality is with what's going on. We'll come back.
The action plan brings together a range of policies. We have already set out our proposals to increase defence spending. We are earmarking £4.2 billion of funding for new flood defences, £370 million to secure the UK's telecom networks, opening a new resilience academy in North Yorkshire that will train 4,000 people every year from both private and public sectors. And later this year, we will have the largest ever national pandemic exercise that will test the UK's readiness for future pandemics. We are also developing a risk vulnerability map for public servants, applying one of the principal lessons of previous tragedies, which is that all too often it's the most vulnerable in our society who are hardest hit in the case of an emergency.
Painful to hear that again. Again, they aim up at the perceived weak in society. We're going to prepare, we're going to do this, and it'll be more of the bloody same, and you won't have a choice. And if it doesn't work, well, they'll say, well, we did the best we knew with what we had. Bull dust.
They're not doing the best. And very telling and very concerning about the flooding stuff. Look at everything that's going on globally. I mean, are we just being attacked from all angles, from the sky, with weather wars, with pharmaceutical wars, with financial wars and actual hot wars that they want our children to go off and fight? It's all very suspicious, Jason. It feels like by hook or by crook, they are taking our civilizations down. And as I said, we can't beat them, financially, monetarily, but we too can walk in lockstep and disobey every cruel, unusual, and very aggressive move they make against us from any of those. And, it's really important. I read something a couple of days ago where someone was saying that she'd forgotten her phone. It was just a tweet. I didn't even know this person. It just popped up that she'd forgotten her phone, and she was about 5 minutes from home. She was walking for the train. She was going to go back, and she thought, sod it, it's just a phone. And that day she felt the most present in her own life than she'd felt for years. She noticed children playing. She noticed all this weird stuff that was going on. And when she got home, she felt more fulfilled because she'd had a day without her bloody smartphone. You can do it. You can cope. You don't always need to take it with you. We've got to get back to the business of living, because they're trying to make sure that our business of living is just one long, painful experience.
Therefore, do you think it was, rate this behavior for me. So my son comes home the other day and he complains that his phone charger's not working, and he fiddled with it, putting a little pin in there, and it didn't work. And he asked me to see how I could fix it. And then he complained that his battery was down to 3 or 4%. He says, what a bad time for my phone to run out of charge. And we said, well, isn't it one that you can put onto a charging pad? And I said, why don't you go and at least get a charging pad? At least you can get some charge on it, something like that, or go and see if you can get it fixed. But do you think it was bad that my wife and I looked at each other and secretly smiled and said, yay, that this phone's going to be out of battery and you'll have to survive without it?
Exactly. You can do it. It's amazing how, dependent we've become on them. And, it is great if you just go for a walk or walk to the shops, or, do something simple and you talk to people and think about things. And I mentioned that I went with my husband. I'm not a fan of AFL, but my husband is a big fan. And I went to the MCG at the weekend, and I did enjoy it. I'm missing the sport gene, so I don't have that, yay, we got to go, yay, we won. And it's such a shame. I know you're a really sporty guy, Jason. But one thing that made me really sad, aside from the fact that I don't have the sport gene, my husband gets really heated about it. He's the loudest guy in the stand. Is that when I look across the stand at everyone, me thinking, God, they've all got that sport gene, and it's the one thing I didn't get. Yes, they were there for the sport, but they were all on their phones as well. Like there was just rows and rows of people and you see it all the time on public transport and in shops and things. And I think, God, we really have become, it's an addiction. It's dependent. It's like an alcoholic or a drug addict. It is a drug. It's a technological drug. And so, I think if you can take yourself away from it. I've said before, don't charge it in your bedroom, turn off your Wi-Fi and unplug it at night. Try and disconnect from this matrix as much as you can. Not while you're watching the Daily Australian, obviously, but afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. I look at sport as an example of tribalism, that you support a certain team and you do that. Now, within tribalism, of course, it's competitive. The sport is competitive. The thing about sport for me is that if you are in the game and you are competing, then you don't like the idea of losing. And one of the things that I can't understand in kids' sport is that they try and tell you that it's not competitive, and yet they keep score. So why keep score if it's not competitive? And I think this confuses the kids. So when I've coached kids in the past in soccer, I ask them, do you guys like scoring goals? Yes. Do you guys like winning? They go, yes. And do you guys would like losing? No. Well, do you want to learn how to win? Yes. Do you want to learn the skills of soccer? Yes. So if they want to learn, I'll teach them the process. So it's not a case of doing the wrong thing in order to win. It's understanding that sport requires discipline, fitness, skills, strategy, and teamwork.
Okay, so wind it back. Do what I say. Wind it back. Look at the larger perspective. Listen to my words. The people who are telling us to indoctrinate our kids not to win try and win every single day. Yes. They never take a day off. They never give in. They're like the Terminator. They absolutely will not stop, as it happens, likely until you are dead. So very like the Terminator, but or at least financially dead, right? They want to win, winning at all costs, any cost, right? Look at the Clintons and all the stuff she's been up to. And they're the people who are creating curriculums and telling us and indoctrinating our kids, just teach them they don't need to win. You know what? Piss off. Teach your kids to win, people.
Yeah, well said. Well, on that note, let me play you to cement what you've just explained, how they try and win in the electorate. Take a look at this.
You don't need to rig an election to change its outcomes. You just need to change who lives in those seats. And right now, they're not just importing people, they're importing voters. The New South Wales Labor government has forced 43 councils to build hundreds and thousands of new homes. In the Hills District alone, there's going to be 23,000 extra homes added in just 5 years. That's 72,000 new residents. That's about 60% of voting power being dumped into one area. And obviously the housing isn't just for locals. Birth rate has been falling, but migration is through the roof. In February 2024 alone, over 105,000 people arrived in Australia. The majority of those people were migrants from India, and Indian Australians vote 58% to Labor and 34% to the Coalition. And that's not just speculation, that's Carnegie Endowment data. Now apply that to areas like Mitchell and Barara. Those are Liberal safe seats. The margins are 10.5% and 7.5% respectively, about 12,000 and 9,000 votes. But if 72,000 new immigrants move in, voting 60 to 40% Labor, those seats are gone, from blue to red in just one election cycle. Because obviously if you change the voters, you change the vote. All these new homes for new citizens means a new political map. At this rate, 1 year of migration brings in the equivalent of 6 federal electorates. In one election cycle, that's 18. And if those voters lean 60 to 40 Labor, that's 36 electorates flipped. My point is, this isn't organic, this is deliberate redistribution, engineered through migration and rezoning. And while the Coalition sleeps through this, the Labor Party is securing power suburb by suburb. It's not about the ballot box anymore, it's about who votes in it.
Bingo. And I always share that young lady on my X account down here. Now, I would like to say, because she's always shared by other people, if anyone knows who this young lady is, or perchance this young lady watches the show, could you please contact either Jason or myself directly on our social media? Because this is as important as what she was saying about, yes, they're vote flipping, right? She's a young person. She's a young woman. And this is what we need. These are the people that we need to speak to. I noticed this when I was doing in-person speeches. You know, we're not connecting to the young people. She's a smart young lady. She does multiple videos on what's going on. So if you want to come on my podcast, on Jason's podcast, or on this radio show, contact us at thedailyaustralian@gmail.com, because you need a larger voice, a larger platform, and we will give that to you, because we need to reach your demographic. It's your future. We're middle-aged. You're young. You've got to live with all this debt and all this, the ramifications of what they've done. So please contact us. I think you're great, and I'll keep sharing you.
Yeah, wonderful. And that's the thing, isn't it? You've got to come up with new ideas. But the thing is, I always say, use your weakness as your strength, but equally in your strength lies your weakness. And if we honestly think that this weak as Labor government, despite the fact that they hold a lot of power, is really going to be the ongoing solution, there will come a point where people will become aspirational who arrive here and realize that they're not going to get wealthy by handouts. They're going to get wealthy by contribution and creation and productivity and all the things that make a capitalist society work. No one ever got rich in a socialist society unless you were the people in power. So these people that are going to vote for the people in power, you're not going to get rich from it. So you're going to wake up to that point at some stage in your life. And therefore, it means that there's got to be a better system. Now, whilst on the right side of the fence, there is a splintered group and there's a multitude of parties, and still the threat, I will say, of more parties when we need to consolidate, but we probably haven't got to peak understanding yet. But on the other side, there's Labor and there's the Greens, and that's about it. And they might have the Cannabis Party, but even they aren't really on the left. So there's not a whole lot going on there. So there's a monopoly of ideas. But like the Democrats that are falling apart in the United States, it will come a point where this pendulum will swing and Labor all of a sudden won't have the power. And that is why it's running this particular case as it is. So you do wonder, out there in the community, are people really just going to fall for the same old, I came to Australia, or vote for the Labor Party just because it is? I don't know. And I also think it encourages people to realise that they can form other ways of building political support without necessarily just saying that we'll just, once every 3 years, once every 4 years, vote for that red label and that's the end of it. People aren't necessarily as naive as that to think that voting for a team is just voting for your football team and that's it. There's a lot more that's involved. So
they may be worried about their visa, Jason. That's the thing. That's how they've got a hold over these people, right? They've allowed them to come here, and they feel they have visa restrictions. And so if a particular party that's very dominant, like Labour, issued all these visas and quickly made them citizens, saying that they have quickly made them citizens. So you have rights as citizens. You can vote a different way, actually. You're not, if you're not on a visa, you've already become a citizen. Because I always think if you're economic migrants specifically, the others I don't understand, the others that don't want to assimilate or work or abide by laws, I don't understand them coming to Australia. But the economic migrants, you don't want to come to a country that is like a winner, 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 chicken dinner, and then sit passively by as it becomes like the country you left. That's absolutely pointless. Let's save what we've got in Australia. People have got some semblance of a quality of life. Things are really, really hard, but it can always get worse. And what we must do is prevent it getting worse by disobeying things that don't make sense.
Absolutely. And one of those things that doesn't make sense, going back to the US probably for our last story, is that today we saw Pete Hegseth and Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the governor of Arkansas, come out and explain how they are removing Chinese ownership of land and farmland in the United States and sending them packing because of food security. And one of the surprise packets in the Democrats is Senator John Fetterman. Take a look at this that he's put up today. Is that popping up there on the screen? I'll just try that again. There it is. I hope many would agree the Chinese government and other US adversaries should own zero agricultural land in our great country. This is really a national security issue plus a food security issue. Proud to partner with Senator Ricketts on this. So you've got Sarah Huckabee Sanders from the Republicans, Pete Hegseth and others standing behind, and now John Fetterman finally agreeing that you don't want, and it is a national security issue when your adversary is owning farmland.
Well, I don't often say positive things about Pauline Hanson, but the first time she ever came onto my radar was when she was saying in the 90s and the noughties, we can't allow China and corporations and individuals associated with the CCP in a communist country to be buying up huge amounts of Australian farmland. She's actually gone a bit quiet on that issue, but she used to talk about that a lot. And we do have an issue with that in Australia as well. Foreign ownership of lots of things. Foreign ownership of land in Australia is like A-OK, but Australian ownership of Australian land, no, they don't want that.
Well, exactly. So how far we've come today. It's been a terrific show, and that little snippet of news there that in the United States, renters will be able to use that income to qualify for a home loan is the first big step in the restoration of the American dream, and one can only hope that such policies work and then transfer to Australia, and all of a sudden our kids who are renting, and I'll tell you what, they are paying a fortune for rent. People paying $500-600 a week as either their share or for a small property is more than enough to be able to pay off the property that they are in. And I do wonder, and I used to talk about this a lot, that if we ever get to true COVID justice, that the payout in a class action for those that were lives were taken, those that were forced to take it and have been injured, and those that were discriminated against for not taking it, all of us will be entitled to some form of compensation. And would it be that that could never be paid out, and maybe the only way to do it is that you keep what you have now, and those that are renters, well, then you keep that house just the same, and then you start and build your asset from there. It would relay the whole entire system. So those that are making contributions to the economic system would be rewarded at that point with something of substance and substantial asset base to build on, and therefore we can restore. That is my hope. I don't know if it's going to happen ever, and also, you could argue that it's also hyperinflationary at the same time. But it would be nice that there was a system in place that, say, by the age of 30, that people owned their own dwelling outright, and they could get on with the business of living. This idea of a mortgage paying until you die makes no sense. We've got to come up with a better system. And I'll tell you what, Labor ain't going to do it, and the Democrats aren't going to do it. But this is the first thing that I've seen in a very long time that provides me real hope that young people finally get a look in, and it's not about discounting your HECS debt. This is a real deal. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. In America, not in Australia. Now, I don't agree with people keeping the rental properties they're in, because that's like socialism, because somebody owns that rental property, so you can't just take it off them. But I reckon if you combine the war crimes, is all I can describe them as, that were inflicted on innocent Australians, jabbed and unjabbed for different reasons, during the last 5 years, combined with the fact that this country has had her rare earth minerals and coal and gas raped and sold overseas by somebody's profit from it, not Australians. If you combine all that, I do think every Australian is probably due $1 million. And in that case, you can go out and buy yourself a property, not a programmed $1 million where they decide what you get to do with it, a flat $1 million, because something has to give, right? Everything's going in one direction. It is a coup d'etat, and these stakeholders believe that they are well within their rights to subvert your democracy, but subversion of democracy is still a crime, as is foreign interference in Australian democracy, and we need to put the brakes on this and hold these people to account. I have no problem watching Anthony Albanese go to jail for his crimes. Thank you for watching The Daily Australian with Nicola Charles and Jason Olbourne. It's hump day. Enjoy it. Tomorrow's Thursday, almost the weekend. We'll see you then.